You know, if your body's healthy and if you're fit and physically healthy, sex is going to be that much easier. And I was thinking about that today as I was watching my little ones and my brother's little ones and the neighborhood's little ones and the large herd of screaming children in my backyard, of how, you know, we go from that to being perhaps too sedate and not mobile enough. So being physically well is a huge predictor of sexual health. The non-sexual intimacy and the overall relationship is a profound influence on couples' sexual satisfactions midlife. Bottom line is, if you aren't connecting outside the bedroom, you're going to have a very hard time connecting inside the bedroom. Now, having said that, here's another one of those gender differences. Back to John Gottman's research and the guy who's flooding and having a heart attack as he talks to his wife, and she's just feeling better and better as the moments go on. One of the most typical differences in couples I see is that for many men, lovemaking, sex is a way to feel loved and to feel loving. For many women, they need to feel loved and loving in order to want to be sexual. And if you're sort of a religious or spiritual person and believe in a higher power, it, her, or him, I often say to my patients, I don't know what he or she or it was thinking, because we are built so darn differently. And a lot of good intimacy over the lifespan for couples is finding a middle ground. For him, after a fight, intimacy, physical intimacy may be reparative, restorative. She, on the other hand, you know, may have steam coming out of her ears and doesn't want to have sex with him, much less for him to touch her for several days. So we need to work on that as couples and find a middle ground, compromise. Also, lots of research on, again, over the lifespan, couples that have realistic expectations of marriage in general and of their sexual health as they age, who are educated about age-related changes and who are realistic and willing to adapt, do much better. When we look at marital therapy research, the number one best predictor of who's going to be married and still speaking under the same roof 40, 50, 60 years later and who isn't, the number one predictor is the expectations that the couple had prior to getting married, the expectations they had for their marriage. Did they think it was always going to be fantastic and loving and romantic? Or did they think that there would probably be days, weeks, months, years that would just be darn lousy? And we're willing to work through those times. And it's the same thing with sexual health, being realistic and adapting, hopefully with some lightheartedness and humor. Many of the couples that I see, in particular in much later life, the 70 and 80-year-olds, my eldest patient to date was 91, and he came to see me because he had a new girlfriend. And he had a wonderful, wonderful marriage, I believe for something like 68 years, to his high school sweetheart. And she passed away. And he met a new companion who he was just thrilled with, but had incredibly conflicted feelings about pursuing that new relationship. On the one hand, being quite excited, enjoying her company, wanting to find a way with he had some significant mobility issues and significant ED, age-related, and some other comorbid health issues. But he wanted to find a way to connect with her intimately and sensually, but at the same time felt quite guilty and was having a hard time doing that. So if you're in that boat, talk to a friend, talk to your GP, search out what kind of resources exist in the community. If you're involved with a pastoral team, make sure that you talk about that. And finally, back to Stacey's message, lifestyle. Be healthy and your sexual life will be a little better. And there are no magic pills when it comes to that, right? Okay. Relationship variables. What do we know about how relationships impact on sexual health midlife? Well, the first thing is, marriages, and I'm sure all of you have a collective wealth of knowledge here as I look around the room, marriages have life stages of their own. Every couple of years, the nature of your marriage, the nature of a significant relationship changes. It changes from the wonderful novelty and lust of first meeting to more of a contentment, perhaps, a family focus, a career focus, in the first decade or two. Children leave. There's the whole empty nester syndrome, finding each other again, finding a way back to be just a couple and not parents. These are all the life stages that we endure as couples. And depending on how you kind of wade through those life stages, that's going to have a significant bearing on the sexual satisfaction and closeness that you have sensually midlife. I mentioned earlier that there's a reprieve in some ways for couples midlife and in their elder years from a lot of the stressors and pressures that couples in younger years face, but there are new challenges. I would say at least half of the couples midlife that I see have elder parents who they're perhaps caretaking for, if not directly on a day-to-day basis. They're worried, they're preoccupied. All sorts of issues perhaps related to their own health and worries about their own health. And the bottom line is, biggest sex organ that we have is our brain. And when we're distracted from sensuality, from our relationship, from centering ourselves sexually when we're with our partner, whether it's with a grocery list or with worries about an elderly parent, that takes away from the sensual experience. We know that couples that are educated, and you're all here hopefully for that very reason, who are educated about their sexual health and their overall health, middle age, also do better when it comes to sexual health. And we know that simply using it has a significant bearing. You know, I remember probably about 15 years ago sitting in a seminar that Stacey was giving at UBC, and in her eloquent way, she said, "Do you remember, Stacey?" She's probably said it, you know, she's going, "Oh no, it's not embarrassing, not this one." She said, use it or lose it, right? So if it isn't being together as a couple, it's important to continue to be together, or be on your own, sort of in self-stimulation, and keeping that regular if possible. All of those things have a physical benefit, and they also have a benefit psychologically in keeping you sort of connected with your sexuality and your sensuality as you age. Back to that message that we are all sexual beings across the lifespan. Also really important at any stage of a relationship to pay attention to one's partner, and that requires talking, communicating, and knowing how to talk and communicate about sensuality and sexuality. These aren't skills that we have, most of us, in our back pocket when we walk down the marital aisle, right? So if you find it hard to talk about these issues, find somebody in your community who can help you, who can give you the tools and strategies to talk about these issues many of us find quite sensitive and private and personal. I mentioned earlier that the overall tone of the relationship, how connected you are, how trusting, loving, do you like doing the same things together, all of these things create a rhythm in marriages, and they create an emotional connectedness that carries through into sensual relationships. And finally, one thing I did want to highlight tonight, one of the things we see that's quite, I think, tragic for couples, when there is a sexual problem, his ED perhaps, her low libido, dyspareunia, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is basically female sexual pain disorder, there tends to be a withdrawal from an avoidance of all affectionate or intimate connections. A lot of the gentlemen that I've worked with over the years, probably hundreds that have mild to severe ED, will say, well, I don't want to give her the wrong idea. I know if I come up and I give her a hug or I give her a snuggle, or I don't want to give her the wrong idea. And for women that are struggling with sexual dysfunction, they too don't want to give their partner sort of an open door when they feel that they aren't either willing or able to carry on with a sensual encounter. It's really, really important if you're struggling with sexual dysfunction in your marriage, whether it's male or female or both, that you continue to nurture the affection, the general intimacy, the closeness in your relationship, and that you communicate about the fact that touch and a hug and a kiss and a peck does not mean an invitation to be sexual together.